Good afternoon, everybody. We need to start on time, otherwise the live feed has about 3 or 4 minutes at the start where nothing happens. I've now noticed. So let's get on with it. Welcome to the meeting of the Audit Committee. Can we start with apologies for absence, please?
We've received apologies from County Councillor Paul Jordan.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the public open forum. There don't appear to be any members of the public present. For declarations of interest, we'd normally take these as they arise during the agenda, but if anybody wants to pipe up now. Okay. So let's go on to the minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 5th of March. Does anybody have any points to raise on the minutes of the meeting?
If they
Move
are,
acceptance,
Chairman,
Chair.
I'm prepared to move them.
That's okay with me, yes. So moved. Accepted, everyone. Thank you very much. So let's have a look at the action list from the last meeting, which is attached to your papers. Now, Mr. Davis was asked to provide a written summary of the information he provided verbally to the committee on the 5th of March. I don't think we've had anything so far.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that information is just being finalised at the moment, and I would hope to have it with members of the committee or yourself in the first instance, Chair, by close of play tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that's fine. We asked Mr. Cope to provide documentation to provide evidence of a fair and objective procurement process for recent purchases of public transport vehicles. The minutes don't put a time limit on that. I thought he was going to give us a fairly timely response. Have we had anything from him?
Mr. Cope responded yesterday, and he is going to get in touch with the chairman of the committee to discuss it and take it further.
All right, well, I will follow that up. Yes.
Can I suggest, Chair, that we then put a time limit on that, because it's been quite a while for him to respond only yesterday. So if he is going to see you, perhaps we ought to recommend he does it within, I don't know, however many weeks to suit yourself.
I'll ask him what he intends to do and tell him when the next meeting is. Sorry, yes?
Chair, if I might, could we just have confirmation that the information that's going to be given us tomorrow will be emailed to us as per the minutes? The minutes said that it would be emailed to us within 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah.
That's the information from Mr. Davis. Yeah. I think we've got that commitment. The formal report on complaints referred to the Ombudsman. We wanted the information that Miss Evans gave us to be more formalised. I have written to Miss Evans and got a response that she was going to provide the information that she thought was in a form suitable for the committee. Again, I haven't actually seen anything yet, unless the Secretary has heard anything. In that case, I shall remind her of what her commitment is. It would be a fairly short report, I'm sure, but I think we would like to see something.
And again, Chair, I think we should start setting time limits now. Otherwise, I'm conscious of the fact that all officers are under incredible time constraints at the moment. They're all being asked to do more and more and more. But unless we set time scales, things will inevitably slip. My personal preference would be for reports to come back to the next committee meeting once they've been requested, unless some specific apologies are made. I also have an inclination that if a report misses one meeting, then maybe we'll just give a warning and expect it for the next time. But I think in both these cases, I shall follow it up. Okay, the next item on the action list was to get some confirmation of processes for reports coming to audit prior to Cabinet and, in fact, other meetings. And I said I would raise this at the Coordination Board. We did discuss this at the Coordination Board that I attended, and the issue is certainly not unique to audit. There was certainly recognition of the issue from the heads of the various committees that were there.
I've not yet seen a minutes of that meeting, but from memory, the timing and sequence of the presentation reports is influenced by the need to make formal decisions, for example, at full council, and pressure of work comes into it as well. The point was made that scrutiny by audit is valid at any stage, including retrospectively, but I don't think I secured a formal understanding to flag which papers had already been seen by other committees. What just happened was there was a general discussion about why and when papers come out at certain times. So I'm sorry I didn't get a commitment on that. If anyone wants to make a further comment? Okay, thank you very much. Representatives from Chepstow School to be invited to a future meeting. An invitation has been sent out. I think, Mr. Howcroft, you thought you might hear something about that from the people at Chepstow?
It was to give the committee an update that the governors have received their draft plan for the next 3 years and are actually commending it to the council. The LEA colleagues has received my draft report to suggest that we ought to accept that, but actually identifying what the risks associated with that are, and that it shouldn't be a matter of simply accepting that for 3 years. There is certain volatility around funding that neither the local authority nor the school control, and that the review of that should be done more cathartically than we ever have done previously. But I think the timescale that you allowed them in terms of the June meeting is entirely reasonable given the work that's gone on previously.
Well, we did invite them to the 16th of June meeting. I don't know whether yet we've had any specific response from them to say whether they'll be able to come to that meeting.
Will we see that plan before that meeting?
It would seem sensible if you're going to ask questions on it that it be shared. What I can do is I wouldn't have expected them to come back to me to confirm attendance if the invite has gone out from the committee section, but what I can do is facilitate a response for you so that we get those that confirmed.
No, I'm sorry I put you on the spot there, Mark. I thought you were going to maybe meeting some people from the school this week, and they might have indicated whether they were planning on coming to our next meeting, but I assume they will make a formal response.
I have a relationship with them such that I can probably remind them that they need to come back and confirm that.
Well, I think what we'll probably do is wait and see if we get a formal response from them, and then a couple of weeks before the next meeting we'll ask a specific question and ask them if they have any have an alternative view on it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this is rather a negative way forward. I believe that we've gone through all these action points. We're on follow-ups on most of them. This is an important matter, and I think that the head teacher or whoever's going to come to represent the school should be impressed by the authority to come and meet us without this prevarication, quite frankly. We've got a concern. We need to address it as an audit committee.
Yeah, I don't think there's a particular pressing issue at the moment. I was just really trying to find out whether we had yet had a response. I think the invitation went out about a fortnight ago.
We met longer than a fortnight ago, didn't we?
The note I did was in draft for a while. We were waiting for inputs from other officers and so on before we sent it out.
Sorry, just to put a bit of context, it was just the fact that I was meeting with them generally that I could remind them of the need to come back to you. I appreciate that probably over the Easter period the schools aren't open, and that's maybe why that you haven't had a response to date.
Okay, we accept that, but we also got another situation coming up. We've got elections, not elections, we've got an end of the council year coming up. They may have a different audit committee at the 18th of June. We have been sort of briefed within it, with a new audit committee going to start again.
Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. Tony's absolutely right, except that we did decide that we, in view of the fact that there was so much work going on with regards to their recovery plan, and Mark was active in finalising that we were waiting until such a plan existed in a final form before we saw them, so we'd have something concrete to ask them about. So there would inevitably have been a delay, but I agree that this is now an urgent matter. particularly with regard to the amount that's having to be recovered over such a relatively short period of time.
Okay, I'll move on then to just the next item point, which was about an invitation to be issued to Arlene Close to give us a presentation on the Treasury strategy, which I think the invitation has gone out for, I think it's for the meeting after next.
Yes, the invitation went out and Arlene Closer have agreed to come to your 18th of June meeting, which is the next one, to give their presentation.
Sorry, the next one. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then. We have a report on managing early departures across Wales in public bodies from the WAO. Is there someone here who would like to introduce this report? Steve Wyndham's just indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I just set, just briefly to introduce this, it's probably fair to say I'm not the report author. You would see that from the study team indicated in the report, and nor do I have any involvement in the work. But I have had a one-to-one briefing with one of the authors of the report, so I'm here today to deliver the main messages. And it's largely, I think it's fair to say, it's on the agenda because officers of the council suggested this is a report that would be appropriate to take to the Audit Committee. So I'm just here really to take you all through the key points and also take away any particular queries or issues you might have, which I'm unable to resolve. It is quite a lengthy report, as you've noted. It's 58 pages long, so it is going to be a fairly high-level sort of run through the issues. And in fact, I plan to cover 4 areas. First of all, why the study was undertaken, a bit of background into that. Secondly, the approach that was undertaken. Then thirdly, the key findings. And lastly, just a bit of my views, really, in terms of what does it mean for Monmouthshire. So if I may proceed on that basis. The first thing I said I'd cover is why this study was done. It's largely undertaken, as I understand it. It is a topical area. You know, in this era of austerity, early departures are being undertaken widely across the public sector in Wales. Similar studies were also undertaken in England and Scotland, and they were well received in terms of the value they predict, the value of the findings. So that was another reason to undertake similar work in Wales. There were also a number of high-profile cases in Wales whereby early departures hit the media. And at the end of the day, it is always a sensitive area, this. The public are interested in this. So, that's like the backdrop to why this work was undertaken. In terms of the approach, it was very much, it didn't really sort of undertake detailed audit field work at each individual audited body. How the study was undertaken was an electronic survey was sent to all of the audited bodies, which the WAO, for which the Auditor General is responsible for. And also data requests were issued to each of those bodies. So that then produced a wealth of information. That was then followed up then with various supplementary queries to various bodies and clarifications, including Monmouthshire. Obviously, they were part of this process. And this report is just a reflection of those findings. So in terms of the key findings, they are summarised on page 11 of the report, under the recommendations section, which covered pages 11 and 12. These are the key findings because they basically cover areas of good practice that were identified during the study, but also areas where there was a view that procedures could be tightened up in certain areas. There were 7 recommendations listed here. All of them are relevant to public bodies and therefore potentially Monmouthshire. One of them is a Welsh Government consideration. If I just briefly take you through each of the 7 in turn, well, the 6 I'll cover, because one of them, as I say, is a Welsh Government issue. The first one, on page 11, is about making sure that advising really, that public bodies should have a robust business case to support early departures. For instance, considering things such as what impact would the loss of an individual have on the service area, and delivery of services, what experience could be lost, what is the payback period of those issues, are they fully costed up, those sorts of issues. The next issue, R2, is a Welsh Government issue. So I didn't propose to cover that, but that's generally about Welsh Government working with councils to consider early departures in the wider context off the back of the Williams review and any other mergers that might occur. The second one I want to pick up then is R3, and that relates to the scrutiny that's undertaken of early departures. And there's a recommendation there that councillors have the opportunity to examine early departure schemes and, if need be, have arrangements in place to approve early departure schemes, particularly where they are of high value or relate to a senior member of staff. And the other point it raises that bodies should also consider maybe using internal audit to provide assurance on early departure schemes. But obviously that needs to be weighed up against other priorities for internal audit. So R4 then, the third one I'd like to comment on, this is an encouragement really for public bodies to, where settlement agreements are used, settlement agreements are essentially where an employee on departure waives their employment rights and are compensated for that in the light of the exit package. But where they are used, appropriate records are retained to record the value of that and why that agreement was reached in that form. Moving on to the last three recommendations then of this report. R5 relates to making sure equality impact assessments are undertaken. They weren't in all cases. R6 then relates to, well, this is about the realisation of savings. How do councils ensure, not just councils, all public bodies, how do they ensure that the early departure does actually manifest itself into a saving? After all, many of the early departures are driven by the need to achieve savings. This is all about making sure the early departure schemes are joined up with the saving programmes and the saving plans and the cost reduction programmes in place at all public bodies. And finally, R7 relates to just making sure, really, I guess, that the quality of information retained by public bodies on early departures is held and is available for scrutiny and from various other bits of management information. So they're the key findings. And so what, I suppose you might very well be thinking, what does that mean for Monmouthshire? I think that's really a matter for the council to consider. As I say, this isn't a Monmouthshire-specific report. These recommendations aren't specific to Monmouthshire. But you might wish, as a council, to self-evaluate yourself against those recommendations. You know, how do you measure up against each of those points? You know, and that's how, in my view, that this might relate and apply to Monmouthshire. As I say, this is a very much a high-level run-through for the reasons I've explained, but if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but I might need to take them away, but happy to accept any questions.
Thank you, Steve. I wanted, first of all, to ask whether the officers from Monmouth County Council have a response to this paper in terms of basically what it means for MCC.
I think Steve has summarised things well. It is an All Wales report that's been commissioned and undertaken, and of course Monmouthshire is featured and reflected within that report. I welcome the recommendations. I think that it brings its own rigour, I guess, and Steve's latter points with regards to us using those to sort of self-assess and ensure that we've got a rigour and appropriate process and arrangements in place is fair and valid. I think the authority fares very well, I guess, in terms of some of the information and statistics that are provided throughout the report, and is in fact probably other areas of the public sector where sort of questions might be asked.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I'll throw it open to broader questions. I've got Councillor Bertrudi first.
Certainly would support any where the council tested itself against all 7 recommendations, particularly R6. Do we track that and and monitor how much savings we make through early departures? And on a more broader question to the WAO, I suppose, is have we, or do any public body at all, operate some sort of clawback, whereby an officer, a senior officer, has departed from a public body, and then subsequently a year, or maybe a year and a half later, the area, the department they were in charge in, there was a catastrophic failure of process or delivery during the term they were in. And is there any way we can claw that money back? I think there's been recent high-profile cases whereby people are left on large sums of money, and then subsequently after, there's been a lot of skeletons in the closet.
I don't know, to be honest. As I said, I didn't undertake the work, but it's a question I can take away, absolutely, if that's okay. And welcome to bring that back to the next audit committee. So.
And also a point for officers in MCC to note, I think, what the follow-ups to early departures. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there are other questions I want to ask a bit later on about payback periods and multiplication factors, what have you, but on the face of it, there's an awful lot of information in this report. And then when you look at it in detail, there's a big piece of information that's missing that holds it all together. And that's the number of normal departures, which seems to be omitted from the paper altogether. So, for instance, on page 32 of the report, there's the information that 4% of the workforce left between April 2010, December 2013. Now, that must be very close to natural wastage. I mean, if we are at 4%, if we assume that an average person's working life might be 25 years in the council or 30 years, I don't know what the figure is, then over 3 years, you would expect 10% to leave through natural causes. And yet those figures are missing from the report throughout. And it begs the question, do we need to actually make any redundancies whatsoever, or can we just rely, if we're talking about local authorities have lost 4% of their workforce in 3 years, why have they made any redundancies at all? Why don't we just rely on natural wastage and not fill the position in? It gets further complicated. If you go to the page 17 of the report, there's a figure 4 there, number of early departures. And again, there is nothing there about normal retirement. We've got all the early departures where people were paid an incentive, or it might have been early retirement, no numbers. And then on the other page, 36, there's an amazing chart, because this gives the early departures and it gives the spread. And I noticed there's somebody there aged 82 who was paid for an early retirement. Now, I'd have thought that could have been natural wastage. I mean, there were several people in their 70s and 80s who appear to have been paid an incentive to leave employment. And I wonder if you have any comment on that. But it seems an astounding figure to me that somebody of 82 is paid an early retirement.
I don't expect Steve can comment on that individual case. I'm aware that there are a wide series of different ways in which people can be leaving early, including voluntary exit and compulsory redundancies. It's not necessarily the case that an incentive is being paid in that sense. Do we have anything to say on that matter?
If I could just, I guess, come back to an earlier point and then come back to the point that's just been raised just now. I think first off, just in terms of recommendation 6, Councillor Petroni, and that point with regards to, I guess, tracking savings. I'm certainly reassured, and I'm sure my colleagues to my right, in terms of Mark and Joy, are reassured with regard to the budget monitoring arrangements that are in place. Certainly, the monitoring, the additional monitoring that's been put in over and above that with regards to budget savings across the medium-term financial plan. And, certainly from my perspective, and I'm not sure whether Joy or Mark want to comment additionally, but I believe there's good rigour within that process. Just in terms of the second point, just in terms of, I guess, natural turnover of staff, I guess it's not as straightforward as just, for every individual who decides that they're going to leave the authority for whatever reason, that the authority is going to just naturally look to remove that position. The vast majority of positions that are held within the authority are there for, essential purpose and reasons. And often is the case that, there is an absolute necessity to replace them. Of course, in terms of the ongoing change, rationalisation and restructuring the authority sees, there are opportunities opportunities that arise at certain points in time where it is known that somebody is either leaving employment or is coming to the end of their career and is leaving voluntarily. And that in itself does at times offer opportunities to restructure at lower cost. But it is not, it's not a black and white thing, unfortunately, and you've got to take every instance in its own right.
Councillor Eaton.
Thank you, Chair. In general terms, I'll use the word modest in respect of local authorities. The average cost of departure of local authority movements is, I would use the word modest in comparison to, for example, National Museum of Wales, who had a fairly high one. It also illustrates a higher cost per departure within the National Health Service. But the main point I come to is a point Councillor Hayward touched on, was the payback. There's no indication in here of the actual payback. It's just an assumed payback time. We've seen within authorities the reduction in senior posts, but there's nothing to say in here or indicate in here how that payback actually applies, in as much as if you carry out a restructure, there's got to be some pay in before the payback. So I'd like to see more detail on the actual payback, not the estimated payback. And I noticed that local authorities are assumed to be 10 to 12 months payback. Yet your own office, WAO, is on 14 months payback, and there was some reasonable, I would say, a bit more modest payments there. But why is it longer to have a payback for WAO as opposed to the general, which is 8 to 10 months, or 10 to 12 months, sorry?
I wonder if we can just turn that back to WAO in terms of, could you find out whether there was any assessment of the actual payback rather than the estimated payback?
You're right to point out what you said. It is an assumed payback. It's not an actual payback, and the payback is simply based on the cost of the departure, and the savings made by the fact that salary savings and employer superannuation and national insurance cost savings. So it is very much an assumed payback period.
But there is a recommendation, is there not, that authorities or public bodies should carry out these assessments after the event? It's one of the, isn't it one of the recommendations?
It certainly is a recommendation, yes. I suppose, in fairness to the people doing the study, this was every public body in Wales, which we audit, which is, as you can see, is quite a sizable number, covering a large period. So for them to sort of do detailed field work at each audit site over the breadth of that period, looking at individual paybacks, that would be, exhaustive, wouldn't it, in terms of an audit. But I think the message still exists, though, about, in terms of the recommendation and making sure that public bodies look at payback and take that on board in terms of demonstrating business cases and factoring into these sort of saving plans.
Well, yes, you make that point, but I should imagine looking at one specific unit and get a factor of what the payback actually is would be a factor for everybody else to be possibly applied to. Be 1 or 1.5 or maybe 2, I don't know.
Councillor Petrini.
It's just what Mr. Davis said, that we monitor that information. Can we put it into one coherent document where It's like a bespoke document where the audit committee can analyse what's happened and how much savings we've made from those early, just purely relating to Monmouthshire local authority rather than the Wales Audit Office, which has done a broad generic. I mean, we can only concentrate on ourselves, and so can't we do that work?
You're suggesting that MCC should carry out its own audit of, its own assessment of early departures. Are we in a position to do that?
I'm just sorry, in my own mind, I'm just trying to knit a couple of things together because we have been in discussion with unions recently, and I guess they offered a constructive critique of the budget mandate process specific to redundancies or anticipated redundancies, and the fact that they were obviously contained within individual mandates and there was references, but in terms of that collective document, they were wanting to see something consistent with what you've touched on there, Councillor Petroni. So, we've made an agreement to the unions that we would look to obviously bring that into the process moving forward. We can certainly look to start that off with effect from doing a particular piece for year ending 31st of March 2015. That's not a problem.
So if no objections to that from other members of the committee, then I think we'll take that as an action point. Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Yes, just on this payback time is quite important. I noticed for Monmouthshire County Council it's 8 months, and I presume that's a function of one, the multiplier, the fact that we pay 1.7 times statutory redundancy, and I presume it's added in there the costs of administration for actually going through the redundancy process. But we're going through early retirements, if you like, for a better word, or early departures, as a budget saving exercise. There's no other purpose for it. We're not trying to cut services. We're trying to save money on the budget. If it's an 8-month period, it means that next year's cuts need to take place by July in order to get the money back to include in the budget. Now, quite patently, when we had the mandates and discussing the budget process, that wasn't completed until December. So at that time when we were taking a full year's savings, this council was wrong to take a full year's savings. We should have only been taking 6 or 7 months of it, because there is this 8-month payback period, which is, I presume, our own figures in here. So does that mean that next year's budget, the medium-term financial plan, becomes much more important because the budget almost needs to be set in July in order to gain the benefits and the redundancies you're going to pay? And the second question is, when we know that this austerity is going to be with us for the next 3, 4, 5 years, why are we paying 1.7 times statutory redundancy? Why aren't we paying statutory redundancy? Is it a union thing, or is it by choice? Because I noted we did used to, one time, we used to pay 2.5%. 2.2.
Well, just allow officers to respond to those issues.
Yes, it used to be 2.2, and I would think it's 2 years ago we negotiated with trade unions to bring that down to 1.7.
Was there any reason why 1.7 was chosen, why we couldn't have made it 1.1 or even statutory redundancy?
That was the point that we negotiated to. So that was the figure that was arrived at that time.
Okay, is it under review again? Are we going back to the unions for another hit? Because it's obvious it's one of the major savings we can make. If we are paying £4.8 million redundancy money, anything we can do to reduce that would in fact have more effect on the budget than anything else we got.
My understanding is that at the current time, terms and conditions of employment are not something that is going to be explored at this stage.
The other point you were making was about the year in which the impact of the savings was made. I don't know whether, from a financial point of view, there's a comment to be made on that.
If I can pick that point up, when we put together budget savings, it's normally predicated on, if it's to do with staff, it's normally predicated on staff restructuring. So we may be saying we're going to make savings from 2 posts. At that stage, it's not clear that we will actually make redundancy payments, because we comply with our protection of employment policy, so we make every effort to redeploy staff and every effort to minimise the redundancies that we make and the costs of those redundancies. In the event that there are redundancies, we have a policy where where Cabinet can approve that those are funded from reserves if they need to be. So they don't, as you say, they don't feature as part of the budget, and we do take the full budget saving because we try and minimise those redundancy payments. And if they do occur and we have to pay them and they can't be found from the in-year budget, then we have recourse to reserves to fund them.
Chair, wasn't that sum of money without looking in the report? Wasn't that 4.8 million last year? So did we take 4.8 million to fund these?
That's over a period of time. I think the report is 3 or 4 years. It's looking at 3 or 4 years. And some of those will be school-based redundancies, and they do have a budget for school-based redundancies.
Yeah, for the benefit of your live feed, you do need to press the button on your microphone, otherwise nobody can hear a word you're saying outside the.
So, sorry, for the point of clarification, as part of the month 9 monitoring, a figure just shy of 600,000 was quantified as the extent of our redundancy costs incurred this year to date. The predominance of that occurs in the CYP Directorate, and the CYP Directorate, unlike other directorates, have a budget of the order of £300,000 to compensate for that those savings.
I know Councillor Easton wants to make a
Yeah,
point.
it's Monmouthshire specific, this one. Is the fact that the number of early departures is shown as 273 with a cost of £5 million. Does those 273 include, you touched on school-based staff, does it include school-based staff, or are they just equivalent full-time posts? And if they're equivalent full-time posts, how many actual people will have left under that 273? Should be a quarter of a job, a half a job. And on the basis of 273 over 4 years, I thought it was far more than that. What is our actual head count at the moment?
Okay, so the 273 is the number of individuals who have left our employment. It's not a full-time equivalent calculation. It's 273 individuals. Our head count at the moment is just over the 4,000 mark. That's the head count. It's not full-time equivalent. It's the actual head count. Yes.
Councillor Down.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, Councillor Hayward has made most of the points that I would like to make, but I just like to clarify, please, first of all, with Mark, that our budget includes no provision other than CYP, which is a very small provision, makes no provision for any redundancy payments which might be a consequence of the budgets that we agree. Am I right in understanding that?
That's correct.
Okay. The other point then is simply to emphasise Councillor Hayward's point about medium-term financial plan. Certainly over the years we have come a long way with that plan, but we're still an awfully long way from where we ought to be with it. I think his point is absolutely right, that if we had a proper MDFP, we would be able to see these things in time, to identify the things in time, to make appropriate arrangements. It was always my view that we would have a proper plan when in February 2015 we were actually talking about the budget for 2017-18 rather than the immediate year coming up. And I'd sort of just urge progress towards that.
Thanks very much for that. Well, if there are no further points to be made about the paper, I I suggest we just recommend it to, apart from the commitment we got from for the report on early departures in Monmouth, we commit that to the council as a report for officers and others to note. Right, I'll move on then to again the Welsh Audit Office report on the certification of grants and returns, which is item 7. Do we have an introduction for that report, Steve?
Yes, me again, I'm afraid. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just take you through the report. The format of the report would hopefully be familiar with you from previous years. It summarises our findings and the outcomes, that is, as well, of our grant audits undertaken at the Council in regard to the 13-14 financial year. So all the external grant claims, in other words, we need to audit for 13-14. But that said, there are some other grant claims that are internal audit also under audit, which aren't included in this report. This is just purely what we audited. If I could start on what I hope is a positive note, the whole report, mind saying that, is, I think, fairly positive, but particularly the audit fee aspects. In terms of page 4, we indicated or provided an estimate of what the fee would be in our last audit outline around about this time last year, and the actual fee was considerably less than that, by some 25k. But some of that, in truth, is due to the fact that some grant claims dropped out of the work programme in comparison to the previous year. So it's not purely due to efficiencies, etc. But still, any reduction in cost to the council is obviously good news from the council's perspective. Moving on to page 5 of the report, which would clearly have a different number in your papers. There's a table there with some statistics, really, showing the number of claims we audited, qualifications, what was amended and what was late, and showing that sort of pattern over the 5 years, including the last year. From there, you can obviously see that there's been a reduction in the number of claims requiring our audit from 15 to 12. There's also been a reduction in the number of qualifications, amended claims and late claims. But I think it's fair to say, given the overall reduction in the number of claims we audited, they're comparatively of a similar sort of relative size in terms of the qualifications size, I mean in absolute terms, in numerical terms rather. Hope that makes sense. So moving on, as I say, we audited 12 claims. The aggregate expenditure of them all was 55 million rather. Housing benefits was by far the largest component of that figure. 5 were certified with no issues whatsoever, but the remaining 7 we had some form of issue on, be it being qualified, amended, or qualified and amended. So roughly half were absolutely clean with no issue whatsoever. In terms of the amendments, there was only a 4k reduction overall in terms of the claims we made, in terms of the impact to the council of those amendments. So there was wasn't a particularly an adverse impact, if you like, in terms of the outcome of the audit in that sense. But there was, as we said, a number of qualifications, 2 qualifications, and unable, obviously, to quantify the impact of those qualifications. Traditionally, however, the grant-paying bodies don't tend to claw money back from this council in regard to qualifications. So it's likely, I suggest, that wouldn't be the case in regard to these qualifications. Whilst there have been improvements from last year in terms of the grant management arrangements in place, there is still, I think, some scope to further improve the arrangements, and that's detailed on page 6 of the report. I think that this can sort of be summarised, I guess, in the sense that some of the errors we found which required amendment were potentially should have been spotted beforehand. You know, that's in our opinion anyway. Whilst there was no adverse impact from these particular errors, they did sort of increase the audit time undertaken to do the audit, And therefore, I feel there's an opportunity that here to potentially reduce the fees further by tightening up some of the arrangements in terms of the QA arrangements in regard to some of these claims. But as I said, I stress this didn't have an adverse impact in terms of the direct impact on the financial value of those claims. The Council does have a grant completion checklist, which is used in regard to each grant claim submitted to us for audit. And perhaps there's an opportunity here for the Council to review its content, maybe tighten up those quality assurance arrangements. That's something I think for the Council to consider. We also looked at the progress made by the Council in regard to our previous recommendations, and they are summarised in Appendix 2. There were 4 recommendations, which 2 were addressed satisfactorily, but 2 we feel there's still further scope to do additional work on. One of those relates to indirect cost apportionments. I remember that being discussed when we discussed this claim last year, actually, this report last year. And this is all about improving the documentation to demonstrate that these cost apportionments to grant claims are reasonable and done on a reasonable basis. I think there were 2 cases whereby we didn't have that sense of reasonableness, so we ended up qualifying our reports in regard to those claims to the grant paying bodies. So there's potential there to avoid those qualifications. And the second issue relates to some of the parameters within the housing benefit system in terms of, as things stand, or did stand rather, there were a number of manual amendments that had to be made prior to producing the housing benefits claim. But it may be more efficient, and probably, I suggest probably is more efficient, if the system can be amended to sort of remedy those errors in the first place to avoid any sort of manual intervention. But I understand this matter is being taken forward anyway. So overall, before I say overall, I should comment on housing benefits. It's been quite a success story, really, housing benefits, I think, the housing benefits claim. We've come from a position in the past where there's been quite extensive qualifications, and it is also a very complex claim. Let's not get away from it. The number of audit tests we've got to do on housing benefits claims are pretty extensive, and it is our biggest grant audit by far in terms of the time it takes. And that work is established by the DWP in common with every other local government site. But coming from that position and in that context, to end up with a position with no amendments, no qualification letter, and also a reduced fee is a good outcome for the council. So I think it's worth commenting on that, really. And finally, really, just to sort of wrap up, there's 3 appendices to this report. One covers individual findings on each of the 12 grants we audited. I don't intend to go through that in any detail, and equally I don't intend to follow up any further on the recommendations appendix, which I've commented on. And equally, there's Appendix 3 breaks down the audit fee for anyone who's interested across each of the individual grants we actually audited. So I'm happy to take any questions, really, that are on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it does look like a positive examination this time. I don't know whether MCC officers want to respond at this point, but if not, I'll just ask for questions from the floor. I think Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Who actually is doing the checking of the housing benefits? Is it Torfain, or are we doing it in-house? Right? It really is a fantastic difference over, I well remember 5-6 years ago what a disaster it was on our behalf, and the merging of the 2 authorities on this particular subject has been a great asset. In the figures, to bring this into some sort of perspective, you're talking about grant claims. Would we have any idea how many claims are audited inside the housing and council tax benefits? Is it you're doing 10,000 or 1,000? Or any idea?
Are you talking about actual claim?
Yeah, inside the. Which I presume is like an auditor, isn't
I don't know whether the external auditors wanted to comment on how many they look at in terms of the audit. Is that what you're on about?
Yeah.
What you want to know? Steve?
Yes. The numbers we required to test is driven by the DWP, and that's, as I say, it's a consistent approach across each local authority, and the testing we do is based on, it revolves around the various components of the claim. For instance, how much it relates to just the day-to-day processing of a housing benefits claim, how much relates to things such as the war pensions arrangements as well. There's various components which we require to test, and basically there's a set of number we test per area, and that is 20 from memory. As I say, it's been some time since we undertaken the audit. But we do extended testing then if we find any errors or any issues in that initial sample. So obviously there's a whole range of claimants, individual cases making up the claim. But the samples we test, as established by the DWP, is only in all honesty, a fairly small proportion of that, really. But there are exhaustive tests undertaken against each of those sample sizes. Each of those samples making up the sample size, rather.
So how many cases individual claims do you look at overall? It's not just 20, is it?
I'm not sure I can answer that at the moment, actually, without sort of referring back to the our audit file. I haven't got that information at hand, I'm sorry. But it is more than 20, of course, but the precise number I haven't got at hand, I'm sorry. But I can obviously bring that along to the next Audit Committee.
Or perhaps you could just send a message through the Secretary about the number of cases looked at. I'm personally got quite an interest in the number of individual cases that you're looking at. I'm also very interested in the relationship with Torvain. I know this is to an extent a jointly managed issue. Are you carrying out a separate audit of Torvain? Is this cost for the total audit of Torvain and MCC, and is the cost apportioned between the two?
No, our audit is unique and specifically focused on Monmouthshire. The auditors of Torvain, Grant Thornton, they would undertake their own identical audit of the Torvain claims.
Do you talk to them about their results?
We do actually, yes. Not so much this year, but the year before we did, because it was the early stages of the relative early stages of the shared service. Yeah.
It just strikes me that's a useful backdrop if you've got two groups looking at it. Councillor Petrini.
Just a point of clarification, Chair, on page 90, the standing data and then further action required. If I'm reading this right, and I could be wrong, it says that basically the system has some properties where the bedrooms they have is less than the actual bedrooms the property has. In which case, why would that be the case in the first place, apart from poor entering of data? And if that is true, are some people out there still possibly liable to the bedroom tax while unaware of it, because the system's recorded their house has less bedrooms than they actually have?
I can't say I'm 100% of the implications for the bedroom tax, but what I am confident on, though, is that whilst the parameters are incorrect in the system, our audit is something which why I'm confident is something that we've looked at, is making sure that manual amendments have been undertaken to sort of correct those errors and make sure the right bedrooms are associated with the right properties. From my understanding, these issues relate predominantly to the homelessness accommodation, so the Torvain benefits team, or the joint benefits team, know precisely where those errors occur. And the point we're making is, why do the manual amendments? Why don't you just get the parameters right in the first place? And but that's been taken on board, and I understand they progress in that.
So were you talking about homes or house buildings in multiple occupation rather than individual private rented accommodation?
Yeah, I'm cautious and not sort of, you know, you may need to speak to the benefits manager to get the precise details on this. So I'm not an expert on the benefits system. But as my understanding, yes, we're talking about multiple occupation properties as opposed to individual sort of family, if I can use that word, units of accommodation.
Yeah, they are very different situations.
Sorry, Chairman, they absolutely are. I wonder if we get further clarification on that.
Well, I think perhaps you could just let us know a bit more about the particular issue. I mean, this is described in quite broad terms. If there could be some kind of information provided to us about exactly what needed to be amended and what the impact would have been, perhaps.
I'm happy to provide whatever the Audit Committee feel is of benefit to them. I probably need a bit more steerage, really, in terms of what you actually need, though, I believe.
How many are wrong, and who lives in them, and what's the effect on them?
Probably don't need their names, though, do we? Yeah. And anything else which helps us understand what's going on here. You know, on the face of it, we see a number of bedrooms recorded incorrectly, and reasonable questions been raised about the bedroom tax and so on, and whether this could possibly affect that, or whether it's all homes in multiple occupation or houses in multiple occupation, and so on.
If I might suggest, if I was to provide this information, I don't know if Joe's got an opinion on this, but to add real value to this, I think you also need to know what's actually been done about it. So it could be fully resolved by now anyway, this particular issue. So I understand it's in train, if not fully implemented. So I'm not sure if officers might need to contribute to a response as well to this particular issue. But that's a question for you to consider, really, if I may.
It would be helpful to know if the issue had been resolved, yes. We would have to take that at face value, don't we?
I mean, if I can interject, I think we can come back together as a combined effort to give you a fuller picture of what the actual position is now. But I think, as Steve said at the outset, this was something that was wrong in the system, but manual corrections were being made so that benefit payments weren't incorrectly paid. It's just the recommendation is making the system right as well. So, but we can come back with a fuller explanation of what the position is now.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments or issues from the committee members about this report? Right, okay, so I'll suggest then that we're receiving this report on certification of grants and returns. So our next agenda item is the annual governance statement, which I believe Mr. Wathen is going to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the annual governance statement, very, very early draft, as members may have gathered, for 2014-15. It is quite a long document and quite a long report, but that is the nature of the annual governance statement, which now feeds into the annual statement of accounts at the year end. So this is an early citing of that. And I'm conscious that in previous years, the Audit Committee haven't had the opportunity earlier on to contribute and to shape the annual governance statement before it actually goes into the accounts. And in previous years, you've had an opportunity to comment on the draft statement almost when it's in the accounts. So this is very much cards on the table early on to give you as Audit Committee members an opportunity to shape the statement for 14-15. Members will note that it is very much based on the 13-14 style. There are gaps in the current statement as reported to you today, which will be filled and populated with 14-15 data when we get that data. Reporting to you early on in April doesn't give officers enough time to pull that data together for 14-15 because we're at the end of that financial year. So that will be populated. I can assure members of that. It continues to be based on the 6 principles of governance outlined by SIPFA and SOLIS, and it's standard across the whole of the UK. But just wanted to give members an early indication of what is expected and any opportunity to contribute and shape the report, as I mentioned. If not today, I'm more than happy to take comments on board for the next month or so. The working group has been set up to populate this further, which will be done and presented to Mark and his team by the end of June, which goes into the draft statement of accounts. So that is ongoing, and this will be updated within that time. The intention will be to try and streamline it as much as possible, so it does become a little bit shorter and doesn't take over the whole of the accounts. It is still meaningful. It does demonstrate our internal governance arrangements, what we've got in place, where our strengths are, what we've done to address any gaps, etc. And we'll be continuing to add to that as we progress throughout the year. It is for 14-15, because that's the end of the financial statements. And then we'll continue into 15-16 in terms of any governance arrangements we feel are appropriate at that particular time. Happy to take any questions on that score, Chairman.
Right, well, we're asked to contribute to the appropriateness and content of the draft annual government statement, either now or in subsequent correspondence with Mr. Wathen. So are there any points you'd like to raise now or comments you'd like to make? Okay, I just had one point, which is in para 16 of the paper itself. To me, the evaluation score, how that evaluation was made, seemed a bit opaque to me. I didn't know from this who was making the judgment, but I think you can provide some more information on that.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. It was actually the external auditors, the Wales Audit Office, who provided that score.
Oh, right.
In terms of the improvement side. That will be updated and populated for 14-15 in further discussions with our external auditors.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, if there's nothing else further from the floor, then now we just note that Mr. Wathen is happy to obtain any further comments that might be made over the next 4 weeks or so. And I think we leave it there now as a work in progress, and we'll be seeing this again in the accounts. Right, so the next item on the agenda is going to be the Internal Audit Section Operational Plan for 2015-2016. Mr. Wathen again.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The report you have before you today is the, again, draft audit plan, internal audit plan for 15-16. Gives you some background about how we plan the process for the audit, but members will probably note it's quite bland. Reason being is that timescales for getting this onto the agenda were quite tight, but I wanted to give you an opportunity of at least contributing to the plan and seeing an early sighting of it. I've got more details here which I will hand out in a moment, but if members will remember, in previous years I've taken the internal audit plan and the annual report together so that members have got a view of what happened previously and what is going to happen in the future within the internal audit team. And that's been fairly well received previously, so you get a before and an after sort of situation. And the intention is still to do that once we've populated the plan and updated the plan. So in future meetings, probably the June meeting, Chairman, there'll be a more of a final version of this audit plan, intention of what we intend covering throughout the year. along with a report of what happened in previous years. And I've been keeping members up to date with quarterly reports on what's been happening, but this is the annual report with my annual opinion. If I could just hand these out a second, Chairman. Thanks. If you run out of ones with staples on, they've got there's 2 sheets to have. Sorry, my stapler ran out of staples. But this gives a bit more detail in terms of what we intend covering, based on the resources we've got available within the team. Covers all the directorates, and there's a summary at the beginning, so indicates the number of days we intend spending on chief execs, children and young people, enterprise, social care and health, corporate and other, and also including a resource allocation for our special investigations, which we get involved with, and I'm sure members are aware of. Then we break that down further into the various sections and the systems or establishments which we intend looking at, and we've risk assessed those in terms of high, medium or low, and allocated a number of days in which we feel we could do the audit. That is only a guideline, and if we come across any issues, then we may have to extend the time we spend at particular audits. But primarily, if we can do the audits within that timescale, that helps in terms of the achievement of the overall plan and the performance indicators. Hopefully, you'll notice that the work we intend to do is quite broad and covers most of the areas of services which we provide across the board within Monmouthshire. This is a draft report, so it can change. It's currently out for discussion with the senior leadership team and the senior management forum. So heads of service have an opportunity to influence what we cover. And that depends on the priority and the risk areas within their particular services that they provide as well. So this was to give members of the Audit Committee an opportunity to contribute. And picking up on an earlier report from the Wales Audit Office in terms of early departures, one of the recommendations was to consider internal audit reviewing the scheme for early departures. Now we don't do that at the moment, but we can incorporate that within our planning cycle and our risk assessment if members so wish, but we can't guarantee that we'll do that next year or the year after. That will fall into our cyclical plan, and it may, depending on the priority and the risk factor compared with the other work that we intend doing, might be a lower risk for the authority at the moment than in a couple of years' time. So we will reassess that every year, but we can incorporate it within our planning cycle. So apologies for giving you the detail at very short notice, Chairman, but I'm happy to take any questions, but intend bringing a final version of this back at a later Audit Committee.
Are there any comments or points people would like to make now? Can I just ask... oh, right. Okay, Councillor Bridge.
Yes, Chairman. I noticed on the document on electronic document, operational plan, 4.2b, areas of slippage, and we know the staffing issues, areas of slippage, it will be taken into consideration. How much of this plan you've just handed out to us is been slipped from last year?
Okay, Chairman. Where we've indicated 14-15 to finish, that is slippage from the previous year. If there's no date, that means it's new for 15-16. What happens is we try and get as many reports to draft report stage as possible by the 31st of March at the end of the financial year. Sometimes we do that, sometimes we don't. It's not an exact science, unfortunately. If we don't get it to a draft report stage, then we will carry over that and finish the work in the following financial year. Some reviews may not have been started in 14-15, which we intended to start. They will be considered in the plan cycle in terms of a priority. Some will be taken forward to 15-16, others will be put back into the cyclical plan.
On that last point, I suppose that's what I was aiming for. How will we know what has been included that hasn't even been started? Or do you know what I mean? How do we track that?
From this information, you probably couldn't, but I could make that clear in the next report I bring to the Audit Committee.
If you could do that, please, that would be very helpful. And that was exactly the same point I was going to make myself. Any further comments or observations? Yes, Councillor
It's
Higginson.
not observations. Anything is in view with the fact is it's late information because the school that I'm a governor of is on there on the second page, in fact, which is Durand Primary. I'm declaring the interest, but I'm a governor, and it's just personal only. It's not prejudicial, really.
Right, okay. That's Councillor Powell declaring an interest there. Okay, well, I'm still looking around for comments and observations, but if not, we can say that we have received the internal audit section operational plan, and we appreciate that this is an early draft, and we're going to see it again later in the year. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Wathen. So the next item on the agenda is another audit plan, which is the Welsh Audit Office annual audit plan. Do we have someone to introduce that?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'll introduce it and then hand over to Steve and to Non. I expect that most of you will have seen one of these before. It's, as you've already said, really, it's our audit plan for 2015, which incorporates the 14-15 financial statements audit. And the purpose of the plan is to set out really what we're going to do, who's going to undertake the work, when it's going to be undertaken, and how much it's going to cost. For the first time, it's a joint plan. You'll note that it incorporates the financial audit aspects of our work and also the performance audit aspects. The financial audit aspects being led by Steve as the financial audit manager, and the performance audit aspects of our work being led by Non as the performance audit engagement manager. I've got a sort of an overarching role really as a financial audit engagement lead and also as engagement director for our work here. In terms of the timetable, it will be undertaken to pretty much the same timescale as last year, which is set out in the plan. And much of that is actually driven by statutory requirements. So we will undertake the work to the same timetable largely as last year, and there's more detail in the plan. In terms of the fee, we will be charging slightly less this year, or proposing to charge slightly less this year than last year. But of course, if we are able to do the audit more efficiently, then we would refund any surplus that we had charged to you. And if it costs more, then we would discuss with Joy and the team the reasons for why it's going to cost more and agree that with them first. So that's sort of a very high-level summary. And if I then hand you over to Steve and to Non, if that's okay, to talk you through the detail for what we'll be doing for both sides of our work.
Okay, yeah, I'll start with the financial audit aspects, and then before I hand over to Non. And that starts on page 4 of the audit plan. To me, paragraph 5 sums up really what the financial audit is all about, really. We are here to consider your financial statements and consider whether an opinion as to whether they're true and fair is appropriate. And all of our financial audit work, in essence, is sort of geared around fulfilling that requirement. So I think that sort of sums it up, really, for me, in terms of what we're doing and everything that sort of emanates from that. In terms of our audit approach, there's a little diagram at the top of page 5, that sort of summarises that. There's 3 stages. First of all, we undertake planning. Secondly is the actual audit field work, all the audit testing, etc. we do. And the third stage is the concluding and reporting, i.e. the provision of the opinion and the provision of the ISA 260 report, which we provide to the Audit Committee and to the full Council to inform them as to whether it's appropriate to sign off the accounts or not. We're currently at stage 2, the early stages of stage 2 in terms of undertaking the actual field work. But the brunt of this, the majority of this will be undertaken once we receive the final accounts in July, early July, or the end of June. As part of our planning, i.e. stage 1, we're required really to assess what risks exist, what are the key areas we need to tackle as part of our audit, and also then what audit procedures we need to undertake in order to respond to those risks. From that exercise, I suppose in many respects, it's probably fair to say at this point, it's a quieter year in some degree, but it has been for a number of years. In terms of changes to the code, there hasn't been significant changes to the external environment in terms of the requirements on the council, in terms of technical changes that are going to warrant sort of tackling within the financial statements. So anyway, as a result of that exercise, the planning exercise, we've got 6 significant risks which are detailed in the report there in Exhibit 2, which we will be tackling as part of the audit. The first one relates to financial challenges. All public bodies are facing significant financial challenges at the moment, and in relation to that, there's then a risk that, of deliberate error and omission. It's just something we need to consider, really, which may be done in order to achieve a desirable outcome. And we've got to consider that and develop an audit response in regard to that particular risk. The second issue then is the follow-up of the joint progress document. The joint progress document following our last audit for 13-14 came to the Audit Committee, and there's a number of issues in there which we'll be tracking and following up as part of our 13-14 audit. The third issue relates to a number of sensitive disclosures within the financial statements, such as related party transactions, senior remuneration note, and members' allowances. And given the sensitivity of those particular disclosures, we will be developing certain particular audit attention to provide assurance that those disclosures are fairly and reasonably stated. Moving on to the last 3 then, overleaf. The first of which is accounting estimates. Now, when I say accounting estimates, I'm talking about aspects of the accounts such as creditors, debtors and provisions predominantly. They are estimates often. Well, they are estimates in many cases. They're inherently subjective, and therefore there's a degree of audit risk associated with those estimates, and we'll be reviewing the basis of those judgments and those estimates as part of our audit. The next issue, accounting for schools. This relates to voluntary controlled and voluntary aided schools, in so much as SIPFA have recently provided updated guidance in terms of how they should be accounted for. And we've already had discussions with Mark and the finance team in terms of how they plan to sort of tackle this, and it doesn't appear to be an issue, to be honest, at this stage, but it's nevertheless something we'll be following through as part of the audit. And the last aspect there, fraud risks. This is something really that's a risk that's common to all of our audits in every sector. As per our auditing standards, it's something we must consider, and it's the risk really of management override of controls. It's something we can't ignore as being potentially being in place or potentially existing, and we need to design audit procedures to mitigate against that risk as required by the auditing standards. And basically, that's all I want to say really about the financial audit aspects at the moment. If there are any questions, I'll happily take them forward, but perhaps it's appropriate for none to...
Well, we do have one question for you, I think, from the floor, so I'll ask Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're accounting for schools, are all the schools put in together, or are the voluntary aided ones put separately? You know, because they'd have money coming from other areas than the rest of the schools. Are they put separately or all together?
Joy might have some comments in regard to that, but this particular risk, which perhaps doesn't explain it that well, I guess, on reflection, relates to how they're accounted for in terms of the balance sheet, in terms of the ownership of the assets Basically, in essence, with voluntary controlled and voluntary aided schools, the buildings should be off balance sheet. They shouldn't be recognised in the accounts. But the land element in which those buildings exist should be recognised in the accounts. That's what this particular risk refers to. I'm not sure if that answers your question. But
thank you, yes. Okay.
Did you have something, Mr. Howcroft, did you have something to contribute?
I was just going to explain that clarification, that there's a specific point in the code changes that requires for us to account for schools' balance sheet entries in a particular fashion, where historically they've never been on the council's balance sheet, and the reality is that that probably won't change to a great extent going forward when you look at this year's statement of accounts either.
Right, well, while we're at this stage, are there any other comments or observations on the plan for the financial audit? If not, then why don't we, if you'd like to introduce the performance side of things, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. What you have in front of you in terms of the performance audit side, you'll notice that a number of the pieces of work are quite standard in terms of having to do this work to comply with the Local Government Measure 2009, as we have it at this point in time. Obviously, that's being discussed as part of the white paper going through at the moment. But for the time being, we are duty-bound to do an improvement plan audit and an assessment of performance audit, which you'll remember that we bring here certificates to say whether you passed or not and so forth. So that will continue over the next year. And in fact, I think your improvement plan is going to council at the end of this month. So then our 4 weeks starts to kick in at that point, and we'll do the audit within that in the 4 weeks after that. So you'll get the certificate within the 4 weeks. In terms of the financial management review, you'll remember this year that we did a financial position review, and I think Steve brought it to the Audit Committee. Was it the last Audit Committee, the Audit Committee before that? So we'll update that. We're working on the methodology at the moment to see how we can update that, how we can bring more value to that as we go through the years. But that will be done across all of the 22 local authorities again, so that you get an up-to-date picture. And any other related financial management work will be built into the corporate assessment follow-up work. You will remember that we have done a corporate assessment here in Monmouthshire as part of last year's performance audit work. We are pulling together at the moment the conclusions and the findings, and hopefully we'll report that soon over the course of the next few months. And that corporate assessment covers financial management, the governance issues, performance management issues, and other things. And the issue, and what you see in front of you there is, rather than us doing specific pieces of work under governance, under performance management, and under financial management, what we intend to do is follow up our corporate assessment over the next year, so that it's all pulled together, so that you're not having bits and pieces. We might do tracer work in all of them, but it will be all pulled together as a follow-up of our corporate assessment. And any locally determined work will be part of that corporate assessment follow-up. And what I mean by that is whatever the report, the corporate assessment follow-up finds and concludes, and if there are any recommendations and proposals for improvement, what we will do is follow up those recommendations and proposals for improvement and update our position in terms of how those have been progressed, as well as how the council has progressed itself in terms of improvement. And I've covered the follow-up part in that. Then any follow-up pieces of work will tie into that. In terms of local government studies, we do these every year, and every year we consult with local councils to ask them what they think the studies should be. I think this year there was a list of 7 that went out from various for various views, and these are the top 3 that came back from the councils. The strategic approach of councils to income generation and charging for services, the council funding of third sector services, and the effectiveness of local community safety partnerships. And again, we continue to undertake good practice events and activities and guides, and that will continue over the course of the year. And again, the same people will be involved in undertaking the work. You'll know me, and you will have seen David Wilson as part of the corporate assessment team. So there's continuity in terms of the people here leading the performance audit work. And that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions or observations about the plan? Right, well, thank you very much. And I would suggest then that the committee has received the annual audit plan from the Welsh Audit Office. Thank you very much. We should now just look at the Audit Committee work plan for 2015-16, which is appended to, I could call them papers, but most of you have electronic documents, I imagine. I'm pleased to see it populated right through to April 2016. I think it's a very useful document and reflects the work of the committee very well. Are there any more observations or contributions about relating to that? Then I suggest we've received our forward planner for the future work, and I'll just confirm the date and time of the next meeting of the Audit Committee will be Thursday the 18th of June, and it will be at 10 in the morning. To my slight surprise, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.